How can we see ourselves in the story of Jacob? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods talking about Bible topics and living one small step at a time. As you probably noticed, I'm doing a little bit of a series and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it. But it's called the Mirror series. And the idea is that we're trying to look at people in the Bible who really mirror us. They're just like people. People like us. They had strengths, they had weaknesses, they did things right and they did things wrong. And hoping that we can find out how to walk closer to God. We want to actually reflect God who created us and Jesus who is the ultimate mirror for us. But we do relate to people in the Bible. And I think that's a lot of times why they're there. We relate to a Peter, right? Who tries to walk on water and sees the waves. And we relate to people. And I think what I'm going to do these is in little batches of family groups together. So we talked about Leah before. And today I'm going to talk about Jacob. And then probably next week I'll talk about Rachel. And then we'll figure another little people group to do together. But the idea is that Jacob was an interesting character to me. I said that I felt very akin to Leah when I was like a preteen girl. I felt in my adulthood a little bit more like Jacob, and we'll talk about what that means. He was someone who started his life grasping for something that he already had promised to him, and he ended his life clinging to God. His story is one of transformation about how he struggled to turn to surrender instead of, I'm going to do things my own way, and ended up walking away with a limp that ended up being a blessing to him. It's this idea of transformation. And Jacob, and I'll talk a little bit about why I felt like Jacob. There was a joke about this airplane, I think I told about last time, where this person was afraid of flying. And so he gets on the plane and the plane staff came to him and said, "Hey, are you doing okay? I know you were afraid of flying." And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm only sitting halfway in the seat." That's Jacob. Jacob spent his life hearing what God had to say to him and then sitting halfway in the seat, which caused him a whole lifetime of trouble. He probably lived somewhere around, the 1900 BC to 1700 BC, area. These aren't exact dates. He was, after. So if we look at it, there was Abraham. Abraham had a son, Isaac, and then Isaac had Jacob. And then Jacob, had these sons that sold Joseph into slavery, which is a whole other family problem that we'll talk about someday. But his story kind of uncovers because Abraham, his grandfather, was promised a covenant. His story starts off in the book of Genesis, somewhere around chapter 25, where he is stretching the story where we go to Canaan. And then we'll go to Haran, which is a city that we talked about with Leah, that's where Leah and Rachel were from. And then back to Canaan again. This was an era that was a whole lot of promises sealed by faith of what God spoke in dreams, in messages, in promises, and covenants to people at that time. He wasn't speaking law. He wasn't speaking rules. He was speaking about what was going to come. And Jacob's world was that of a very tribal and nomadic area. Lots of livestock and tents and wells, and family alliances were very important. Family alliances had a lot to do with how well you were going to survive on the land. And yet it's striking how really modern, even though this doesn't feel modern because it's not our world, how modern his story feels. Talking about ambition, rivalries, deception, and guilt. This long road to reconciliation for Jacob is what really kind of puts the story into focus for us. So his eye in mirrors is identity. Who was he at his core? And so Jacob, the name means heel grabber, because when he was a twin to Esau, he was born grasping the foot or the heel of his brother Esau. So his brother Esau, it was the older child. He was trying to get in there right from the very beginning. Maybe they duked it out inside and were trying to get out, right? But it hints early at his character. A man who was trying to reach for what he wanted or what he was told he was going to get, even if it wasn't his to take. He was someone who was going to get things his own way. I think it strikes me that Jacob was clever, he was persistent, he was strategic, but it also means, too, that he was anxious and competitive with his brother, haunted, in a lot of ways by his own deceit and how his relationship with his brother ended up being. Jacob was promised to be there was a lot of discussion in the Old Testament, which we haven't done in the Bible in small steps yet, about the older son who was supposed to get the blessing is going to yield to the younger son. We're going to see that time and time again throughout a lot of scripture, that when we see these stories in the Old Testament, and that's the story, is the blessing was going to be Jacob's, that he was going to be blessed by this. But instead of trusting in God, he tried to steal it. He tried to trick his way into it, tried to control it instead of trusting God. And that led to all the family problems that he has with it. At the core, Jacob was a trickster. He was someone who was going to get what he wanted. And that's not the part that reminds me of me, but he was going to get it one way or the other. His flaws point to a man with a restless heart who couldn't stop searching for something more, wanting something more, and not picking the right choices all the time. He was a good model, I think, for his persistence. Obviously, persistence is something that we admire. When life got hard, he kept going at it. He didn't run forever. We'll get into a story in just a little bit. He endured years of work, 7 years of work under Laban to marry the woman he thought he was going to get. And then he got Leah, who he did not want. So then he worked another 7 years very diligently to get Rachel. He built his family. He grew the flocks. He worked very hard for Laban and used his wisdom to really help Laban get ahead and to help him get ahead in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of places where, he meets God in the dark later in his life, and it says that he wouldn't let go. He wrestled. People talk about whether this was an angel of God. Was this Jesus himself? But that's kind of my feeling of it, is that he was actually wrestling with Jesus. And I think that Jesus knew what he was going to teach. But he was wrestling. He wouldn't let go. And he's like, I'm going to hold you through the night. I will not let you go unless you bless me, right? And we'll find out and talk about that. And in this case, I don't think it was arrogance. I think it was grit. I think it was faith. He believed and knew who God was, and he wanted the source of blessing, even when he didn't really understand what it was, and he didn't understand probably the proper way he was supposed to get it. And that faith showed because they stayed and struggled all the way through dawn. We'll talk more about that story here in just a minute. But the pitfalls he showed, the other R, risks and wrongs, if we put wrong with an R, is that Jacob's life warns us about trying to control what God has already promised to us. That he deceived his father. So what he did, and everyone knows kind of the story, is that Esau was a hairy man. He put a sheep skin on his arm. He cooked a meal that his brother would have prepared with the help of his mother to trick his father into giving him the eldest son blessing. We know that throughout time. It was even true of like George Washington. The eldest son got the land. George Washington became a land prospector. He's the second son. He gets nothing, practically nothing, right? Same thing here. So he tricked his father, Isaac, into giving the blessing of the older son to him through manipulation. That was a trick. Because he was already promised he was going to get this blessing, but he had that fear. What if God doesn't come through for me? What if this thing that was promised to me by God doesn't happen? He wanted that blessing so much he did not just wait on God. His impatience created this plan to trick his father. I can't imagine the sadness his father had. It caused then family divisions. Esau, was there as a threat to his life for his whole life practically. Years of regret, bad blood between the brothers. And, you also have to think about the mother, which we're not talking about today, but she helped plan that trick. How does this family go on? Isaac knowing that he was tricked out of the birthright by his wife and son, the brother knowing that he was tricked out of this birthright by his mother and his brother. I mean, the whole thing is really terrible. But this was something he was always going to get. And the story reminds us that we can't rush God's timing. We can't outsmart his plan. When we try to grasp for control, we lose peace. Think, is kind of a big family thing, right? When Abraham and Sarah thought they couldn't have children, they provided the Egyptian maid and had Ishmael, who was not going to be the son. God's plan was to go through Isaac. But they thought, well, God needs a little help from me, so I'm going to come up with a new plan. The ongoing message to us is that we see Jacob's story, and it really comes about in transformation. We see him initially getting tricked. We see initially him tricking his father. Then we see him getting tricked by Laban. Then we see him having these two wives having this conflict. This is just a family of conflict all the time. But at some point, like I said, he meets God. He wrestles. He doesn't win. He surrenders. He got a limp from this, but he also got a new name, Israel, which means God fights, or the one who struggles with God. So he went from being someone who grabs something he shouldn't get, at the time he wanted to get it, to someone who struggles with God. And I know it's not a slam. And it's a moment of identity shift where he goes from self-reliance. I'm going to find a way I'm going to be reliant on God. God didn't erase Jacob's flaws. He redirected them. That same determination that fueled his deceptions became determination for him to cling to his faith, for him to cling to God. It's proof that God can redeem even the most stubborn parts of us in our glory. And so if you feel someone who's stubborn, overly ambitious, that's going to be the message for you. God can redirect it so that stubbornness can be used in great ways. And the last R, is going to be our reflection. What does it mean for us? Are we all little Jacobs built inside of us? We want control. We manipulate outcomes. We grasp for something that may be intended for us, but we want it in our timing. Instead of surrendering to the trust of God, God still meets us in the dark, doesn't destroy us, but instead gives us a blessing, but also teaches us who we are, renames us to that extent. And so maybe you're in a wrestling match with God right now, looking for an answer, looking for faith, looking for a way out of your own doubts. Maybe you're going to get that limp afterward, the humanity of us, where we walk away limping. I walked away from my childhood limping. I walked away with a lot of hurts, and now I've come back, in humanity and humility and dependence. It softens my heart now because I understand how tough life is without God. And that's often the real blessing, is our turnaround, our ability to change from the Jacob who is going to grab to the Jacob who is going to contend with God. But God is going to be the center of that. And so if we see places where we're struggling with God and we're not quite pleased with his timing, it's very often the places where he renames us into something else. And so that's something that we can take a look at. And so I think that if you are a person who sort of feels like Jacob, where you're just struggling with something, you've ruined a relationship, you're fighting God in a particular area, and it's ruining things around you, stop running. Face what you've been avoiding all this time. Whether it's guilt or fear or an old wound, God can heal that, and God can build that relationship back up. All we have to do is stop running. Eventually what Jacob does is he stops running. He flees to Haran because of this thing he did to Esau, his brother. Esau is chasing him all over the place. And eventually he gathers everything he has and he waits for Esau so that they can get reconciliation. The next step is praying honestly, telling God what you're wrestling with. Instead of grabbing and wrestling with God, why not just tell him? God knows what it is you're facing. Have a conversation about it. He's not offended by a debate, by a fight, by a discussion, right? He's honored by the reach, by him reaching out his hand and you grabbing his hand. When you're talking to God, you're engaged with him. He's not great with when you walk away. And so in this case, we're going to come together. And whatever I think limps you got in life, we all get wounds in this life. Whatever it is you have, instead of having shame, see it as a reminder that you have come someplace, encountered God, and God blessed you. And maybe you're walking away limping, but that's the price you paid for getting this amazing blessing. You know something now that you didn't know before. And then the last part, like I said, is reconciliation. Jacob eventually meets Esau, takes a brave step towards peace. And can you do something like that with yourself? Can you come to peace with yourself? Can you come to peace with other people? Or come to peace with God himself? You have to remember that faith isn't about having everything figured out. It's about holding on to God when you don't know what's happening next. I could bring in that whole Peter walking on water kind of thing. But, that's the idea, is holding on to God. So if you're the Jacob, the wrestler who won't let go, maybe his story reminds you that blessings comes oftentimes from struggles and comes from when the struggle is with you reconciling with God. When you decide you're not going to go things your own way, but you're going to believe in God's promises. And maybe that's the point where God gives you a new name. I hope that helps. I appreciate you listening to this. Jacob's story is very complicated. Like I said, he was a man who was given promise, who just decided he was going to do things his own way. And and that's why I think I just love the story of Jacob so much, and why I felt like him for so long. I don't know why it spoke to me in that way, but I always feel like I trust in God, but I'm always going to do things my own way. I'm a fixer. I'm a doer. I'm going to make something happen. I'm going to figure out how to retire and how to pay my bills. And half the time I then think later, oh, I should really have relied on God. That story always really kind of sticks with me. And so the thing about Jacob is that he knew God's promises were real. He just didn't fully sit down on the plane with them. He had one foot out the door, and he thought, I can have the controls. I need to have the controls just in case God needs a little bit of help to keep my life airborne. And honestly, I think it's how we live too. We believe God is in control. We just don't relax all the way into it. That's my problem, is I worry about things in my life. I worry about my retirement. I worry about how this is going to happen or that's going to happen. And that's because I'm not fully sitting in God's seat. I'm not relaxed all the way into it. And I'm halfway in the seat. I'm ready to jump up if somehow faith feels like it's not working out for me. I mean, not that I would give up my faith, but you know what I mean? Like maybe I have to do something. Maybe hey, God needs a little bit of help here for me. And I'm always there for that. But God calls to Jacob and to all of us to sit down, trust that the plane is going to fly, not be because our hands are on the grips or the control, but because of his grace and his mercy and his love for us. And a quote that he said that I really liked, that was in Genesis 28:15, and this is CSB. He says, look, this is God saying it, look, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised you. That's comforting, right? That is comforting because it reminds us that despite everything Jacob did, despite how far from home he was, God was committed to him, committed to watch over him, and committed to do the thing that God promised to always do for him. From the very beginning, it underscores God's faithfulness. I will not leave you until I've done what I promised. It applies to our journey too. Even when we feel insecure and overlooked, God's promises always stand. And if we feel like we're kind of sitting halfway in the seat, let that sit with you for a while. I'm someone I think the next lesson I need to learn in life is I need to learn how to trust in God. Know that his promises stand. And even when I feel like I must do something and I must help God out, understand that he is not going to leave us until he has promised to do what he promised. He promised Jacob different things, but it applies to us as well. Thanks so much. Please leave a comment in the channel if you like this series, if you have some thoughts on it. I want to do a lot more with it. I have ideas. Boy, watch out when I have ideas. But I think this is a nice way of us understanding how God relates to us by how he related to people in the Bible too. Appreciate you being there. You could always email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. Thanks so much. Have a great day.